welcome to Delapré, the Happy Abbey, a series of conversations with local people about Delapré Abbey and how it links to the wellbeing of the community. My name's Laura Graham. I'm a Northampton-based freelance writer and community activist, and in this episode I speak to Tré Ventour. Tré is a Northamptonian. He's a writer, a poet, curator and race and black history educator. He's also currently studying for his Masters in Race Education and Decolonial Thought with Leeds Beckett University. He's also, not that he likes to admit it, Northampton's Male Role Model of the Year. In this episode, we talk about colonialisation and how heritage sites like Delapré may well have benefited from the slave trade. We discuss how this impacts the well-being of black and brown visitors and what the Abbey could do to uncover its history and educate visitors about the impacts of race and class inequalities. Tré, it's lovely to see you.
You too, Laura.
It's been ages since I've seen you in real life, so it's quite a treat to be able to come and sit socially distanced in the library at Delapré just while they're closed to the public, and we can see lots of people walking past outside, can't we? But it's nice and quiet and it's kind of a little bit eerie. I wonder if there's any ghosts in here.
Well, Northampton's famous for ghosts,
Well, I mean, they're everywhere, aren't they?
Yeah.
We've got quite a rich history. So, it's quite nice to sort of be behind the scenes when no one else is here.
Yeah.
So I'd be really interested to just find out a little bit about how you use Delapré or the grounds, if at all.
I've only been here a few times, even though I grew up in the county. But when I have been here, I've enjoyed like walking around the grounds and whatever. But I've never been inside. I've always just been outside, in the greenery. So
It's nice to be outside, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh no. I grew up in Northampton. I grew up here, went to school here. I'm a local writer and creative practitioner and artist. And I started a Masters in the lockdown as well.
Just as you do.
Yeah.
Because you've got nothing else to do. You might as well do a Masters.
Doing a Masters with Leeds Beckett University in race and education and decolonial thought. So all that school stuff on decolonising the curriculum.
Wow.
And learning about all the academics of that side of it. Which I think would be useful in terms of helping schools and whatever with that stuff.
You do a bit of that already, don't you?
I'm trying. So at the moment I help institutions out with race education and that sort of thing, and Black history workshops, and whoever wants to know really. Mainly it's been universities at the moment. Student unions picked it up. Schools less so. But the schools I have had, surprisingly, have been private schools.
Interesting.
Private schools have been faster to pick it up than the state schools, which I found really interesting, but also quite shocking at the same time. But yeah, that's basically what I do. I write articles and poems and help institutions with race and anti-racism and that sort of thing. Yeah.
I mean, you do a lot, Tré.
Yeah.
I think you're being quite modest in your introduction of yourself. And aren't you Northampton's reigning inspirational man?
Oh, God. Yeah, I won that highest in November. Northampton's male role model of the year 2020.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and that was voted for as well by people, by the public at large. So that's really nice to hear. People think I'm an inspirational person.
I think you are. Yeah. I think you're very inspirational, Tré. And well deserved to be reigning, I want to say champ, but that's not really the wording. So you've been to Delapré before and kind of been outside more in the grounds, and you live in Northampton, don't you?
Yeah.
How does it feel when you come to this kind of green space?
If you had asked me that question before I went to university, I think I would have been less critical of it. But learning what I have done about higher education and race and colonialism, coming to places like this, I find them quite oppressive. It's not just Delapré, I've been to other places as well, like any abbey with grounds around it, any the country houses in this country. Take somewhere like Althorpe. It's quite similar state of affairs. When I think of a place like that, I think about English heritage and colonialism. I did a talk last year at Stowe School in Buckinghamshire, which is quite similar. It's when you look at these grounds, they're like landscape paintings of the 18th century, and it does give off a vibe that's not very nice. As a black person coming here, whose ancestors were enslaved people, and then looking at these places, like it gives off a kind of air of superiority, I think, that I'm not comfortable with. So yeah, that's what I think of it. But then as a park, or green space outside of the politicised idea of it, I think it's quite nice to go walking around. But at the same time, to take these places outside of a political context is privilege, I think, in itself. Not just a race thing, but class as well. If I wasn't a black person, I'm still working class, and these places were oppressive to working class communities. So, yeah.
And it's really interesting that you say that, because that has always been my viewpoint on heritage sites like this. I was taken to them as a child, so my mum grew up on a council estate, but was very interested in heritage and big houses, and just really, I think she liked history more than anything. So we used to go, but it would always be sort of the roped off kind of, don't touch anything. It felt, like you say, very austere and kind of not from like anything that I'm used to, and not about where I'm from. So I've found it quite difficult over the years to connect with places like this, to be honest. And I wonder, I mean, we're not the only ones that feel that. So I wonder what you think that somewhere like Delapré could do to make it not feel like that for us.
I mean, I think following the murder of George Floyd, a lot of institutions were giving lip service. They said, "Oh, we're going to do this, this, and this," and then they didn't do it. Delapré is in a unique position, I think, to actually be able to do something. And I would say, like, from an anti-racism point of view, an exploration of its history would be quite good. And if there is links to colonialism, a history project with community would be really interesting in response to the murder of George Floyd, but Northamptonshire in general, because Northamptonshire has links to the slave trade that are evidenced, and there's documents and everything. I've seen some of the bits online where local people were compensated for their loss of property, meaning enslaved people, after the government paid out to the slave owners, and a few of them were local. I mean, and when I say local, I mean people that lived in Wellingborough and Higham Ferrers, but also I saw one person that lived on Abington Street itself. And most of them were bit players in a wider system, but they were still complicit. So I think somewhere like Delapré Abbey, to explore its history, if there is a link to colonialism, look for it and find it and educate communities on it. And paintings like this really give off an air of superiority as well.
It's a painting that is probably twice my height, and it's a young white woman, like upper class woman, in I guess under a tree, in a bit of a kind of, it must be on the grounds, I'm assuming here, and she's sat above the fireplace, looking looking over us.
But yeah, Delapré, Northampton's not, as a town, like, or a county, the wealth is in the villages, I think, predominantly. And this place, it sort of replicates that image of village, image of like village Northamptonshire. Because you go to Northampton town, then people are going to food banks and stuff like that. Yeah. And then you've got this place on the periphery of the town, sort of gazing at that austerities type thing. And it sort of reminds me of there was a guy, I think his name was, I can't remember his name, but he basically created this idea called the Panopticon, and it was basically a prison guard could look at the prisoners inside of a jail from a tower in the middle, and he could see what they were doing and that sort of thing. But the prisoners could not look back, and it's the Panopticon. criminologists will know what I'm talking about. But know what I'm talking about.
I knew there'd come a point where you'd lose me with your words.
You should it's called a panopticon.
It's a great word.
Yeah,
not a great concept, but a great word.
But that idea of oppression, and the prison guards could look at from a tower in the middle at the prisoners and what they were doing, but the prisoners cannot see them, and who's looking, essentially. And places like Delapré Abbey, I think, are quite like that to the town that it's situated in.
Yeah, I mean, yes. And I think my question around that would be, so Delapré Abbey itself, as I understand, was kind of saved from ruin maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and had a lot of public money, so money from the council pumped in to preserve and renovate it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that kind of investment of public money in this type of place?
It depends what it's been used for to save. What are you saving?
The building.
Essentially, and the types of people that come here as well. Because from my knowledge and from when I've come here before, it's predominantly been white middle class people that come here. So at the moment, you're saving it for white middle class people. So that's what it says to me. So if that's who you're saving it for, I'm not sure if I'm with that, essentially, because you're saving it for the privileged, the powerful, essentially.
So how do we get around that? Because I know Delapré have given out 7,500 annual passes to local residents in Briar Hill, places like that. So, I mean, I don't know what that means. I think it means that they can come into the building because obviously the grounds and the parking is already free. So that feels like a nice gesture, or at least, getting rid of a pay barrier. But what more could be done to actually make it somewhere that people would want to come?
On one side of it, I think that you're limited on who would want to come, just because you can't change the exterior. It looks like a landscape painting from the 18th century, and there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing that would make it more colonial is if anyone was playing cricket outside, literally, there's nothing else you can really do about it. But what you can do is tell people what you're not doing and take accountability, make yourself accountable for it. So, historically speaking, I know there's local historians who could be working with this place, exploring its history of class inequality as well. By when you've got this lady on this painting here, I would say she's probably an aristocrat type person. But what you don't see in paintings like this is how to have an aristocracy, you need to have class inequality. You need to be subjugating someone for that to exist at the same time. And one of the examples I would say for people who want to see stuff like that, read Charles Dickens novels, because they're not just novels, they're history books, to me anyway. You read Oliver Twist and you see the workhouse, but you also see when he gets adopted by his grandfather, who's an aristocrat, and for him to exist, there needs to be a very subjugated working class poor. So I think historically, for places like this to exist, there would have had to be some sort of class subjugation for it to exist. As bad as that sounds.
Well, it doesn't sound bad, it's fact.
Yeah, it's fact.
And it's the world that we still live in. That's what capitalism is based on, isn't it?
Yeah. So anti-racism is also anti-capitalism. And historically, I would look at that. If there is a link between this place and colonialism, or people that benefit from colonialism, I would want to know. It doesn't have to be slavery. It can be Britain in India, for example, Britain in China, Britain in any of those Asian countries that it once colonised, Britain in parts of Africa as well, after slavery. So if there was a link between a person that once used this place and colonisation overseas, I would want to know. And that's a history project in itself. Take responsibility.
And how, so, because that would be quite interesting to see, but also then how does it become something that's worthwhile as opposed to something that is just, oh yeah, look what happened a couple of 100 years ago? I mean,
you see how colonialism on a racial grounds, you'd see why racial inequality exists today as well, because while slavery was abolished, for example, colonisation, they won the war on race, because race was created, doesn't it? It's a constructed concept. But in creating race, then we have racism, and then that's why you see so much of it today, because we're still living in the aftermath of that, and we've not dealt with it properly. So places like Delapré Abbey could have links to that time where they benefited from the money inherited from colonialism. And that's when you get into concepts, which I won't explain now, of racial capitalism, which in the American context, you look at the prison system, where you've got prisoners making stuff for big corporations and that sort of thing. Back in the colonial times, we just called it slavery, where you'd have slaves picking cotton and whatever in the States, and sugar and tobacco in the Caribbean and that sort of thing.
So what you're saying is that places like this have a responsibility to look at the history, expose the history, in order to inform people today about where we're at and where we need to get to.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether Delapré has a link to colonialism anyway. It might not. But I do know for aristocrats to exist, some of them may either have links to things overseas, in air quotes, or subjugation of the working class poor. That has to one or the other. It has to be one or the other, really, for them to actually exist and make as much money as they did. Because it's not fair. Today we'd call that fair trade. It's not fair trade. So yeah, for them to exist, there has to be something somewhere where someone's doing some dodgy dealings. So yeah,
the technical term.
Yeah.
No, you're dead right.
Yeah.
You're dead right, and I think it's really important that institutions, or if that's the right word, like this, do the work, isn't it? Like,
I mean, what I did find as well is that working class people benefited from colonialism, or slavery in particular, not necessarily as slave traders, but from the benefits of slavery. So, what sugar became a commodity out of slavery. Working class people, some may then have bought sugar in a supermarket, for example, and through that, in a shop, from the sugar picked by and sugar cane on plantations or whatever, and there's that link, and it's sort of a divorced link at the same time. Because you never see a slave. Like many white people in this country at that time did not see slave. They did not see a slave, or they didn't see a plantation, but they reaped the benefits through sugar and things like that, and cotton clothes. So.
Well, Manchester, isn't it? Manchester and Liverpool and those places were.
Yeah, I mean, there were slaves in this country, but not to the numbers in comparison to the Americas and the Caribbean. But yeah, Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow was the merchant city. Tobacco merchants. If you had a smoking habit in the 18th century, you got it from Glasgow. All those. It's mad how divorced that is. And if there was a link to here, I would not be surprised. But if there was a link to here, I'd want to know. I'd badly want to know.
The dodgy dealings.
Because Northamptonshire has a history embedded in colonialism and colonial exploitation through slavery. And there might be other links as well. Northampton All Saints Church, on the top of it, there's a statue of Charles II, who was one of the main leaders of the Royal Africa Company, which was the largest slave trading company in the history of the slave trade.
No way.
The monarchy started this all, and then
let's not even start.
So yeah, we'd have to go. So if Northampton has links, let's expose it and educate people on it. Essentially, that's all I'm saying. I don't want to take these places. I don't want to remove these places because a lot of people do want to remove these places, but I don't. I quite like these sorts of places. I like the parks, but take responsibility.
Yes, exactly.
National Trust are doing some stuff, and they've been criticised for it as well by people. Like National Trust, as an institution, have been looking into their slave trade links and colonial links.
I've seen a bit of that. I think they've tweeted about it and stuff, haven't they?
One of their people, I think, is Professor Corinne Fowler, I think, she's had abuse online from people. I think she's an academic at Leicester, and she's been doing research on it, and that's her field. But the abuse online it's been ridiculous. Daily Mail, the usual rubbish. The Daily Mail, just take responsibility, educate people on it. I think a lot of people would like to know if we have if we're complicit in it, we'd want to know. And then you have the tools to challenge as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Drop the mic.
yeah.
Thinking about, so kind of on the track as we've been talking about, obviously a new generation of, there's a huge student population here. I think it was 10,000 students at the uni. You know better than me.
I think when I worked there, I think it was around 14, but I'm not sure what it is now.
How do you think the university students should be interacting, or could be, I think should's the wrong word, could be interacting with this space?
Majority of black students, well, not just black students, but black, Asian and ethnic minority students, international students as well. Many of them come from countries or have heritages derived from countries where places like this benefited with the reaps of the money that was made during colonialism. So I know, like, take a country like India, for example. I know Northampton has a lot of Indian students, students from Pakistan and also from China. All of those countries were once British colonies. Pakistan was created out of colonialism, out of the partition of India. So if a place like this had links, that would be a good project to get international students engaged here, and that as a shared history between Britain and India and Pakistan. So that would be one way to do it. And when you look at the majority of students there, it is black students, black and brown students, and that is quite an eerie feeling when they may not be from those countries themselves, but their parents probably are, or their grandparents maybe. Like my grandparents are not from Britain, they're from the Caribbean. So that would be a way to do it. I think that's one way to look at it. But just to show students there's another side to what Northampton is, because I think a lot of people in Northampton do slag it off quite a lot, and they shouldn't, because I think it's what you make of it yourself. And I know a lot of students are from London where a lot of things are on their doorstep and everything is given to them. But here outside of a city, you sort of have to make your own fun a little bit. And because I grew up here, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But for people who come from cities where things are on your doorstep, you sort of have to go out and look for it. I think that's quite interesting and exciting. But I think to have someone tell students that, and that will mean the university has to know its community, which they don't. At the same time, I don't think they've put enough effort into engaging with local communities. So that would be another way. That would be another thing to do.
Yeah, and that's really important. I think, part of the conversation that I wanted to have today was really about this, because, we can sit and talk about what a lovely architecture this is, and how we've got some lovely green space right in the centre of Northampton, and isn't it nice to be able to walk around, and, quite surface level. And that's where I'm coming from my position of privilege. Like, this is what I see it as, and I recognise the class issue, but I certainly... it's not in the forefront of my mind how it can make people feel. And if we're talking about well-being and the well-being of our community, then, these areas need to be discussed and they need to be actioned.
I mean, from an anti-racism point of view, this place will probably... you find some skeleton somewhere of linked to clothes. It doesn't have to be from a black perspective. Could be from an Asian perspective as well. You might find links with Ireland, for example. As Ireland was the first British colony, and because it worked so well in Ireland, they basically went out and did it everywhere, essentially. So that would be a way to get Northampton as a town engaging with the more national conversation on colonialism, but also from a class perspective. This is not a rich town at all.
No, it's not.
Addressing working class history would be quite good with the historians at the university, and then that way you engage in students as well. I know history students would be interested in this, sociology students would be interested in this, even English literature students would be interested in this, I think, because this place like this, I think of Jane Austen. like when I watch places like this with the grounds and that sort of thing. And for students that are interested in those sorts of books, these are the sorts of places that these books are based on. and take what you want from that as well. And when you read Jane Austen books, she doesn't talk about anything like to do with like inequality or racism or anything like that. But she does tell you how great everything is, and like everyone's gone on a little jolly, let's go on a little walk around the grounds and that sort of thing. But characters like Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, like they didn't just get rich overnight. Like the money that their families have, came from could only exist because of inequalities that are happening around them. So, but Jane Austen won't tell you that because she wants to portray an image of England, and this is the image, the English,
this wholesome English kind of
this green and pleasant land, and that's the England we portray overseas as well. So when you talk to American people about England, they will tell you about Downton Abbey and The Crown and that sort of stuff.
I do love watching those.
Yeah,
shows,
I do.
They're my guilty pleasure.
Getting students involved will be imperative because it's 10,000, 13,000, 12,000 students at the university, I think. Post-COVID, heavily black students and brown students and international students. I think there'll come a point when white students are the minority.
I was going to ask you, do you know the percentages of
I think when I left,
demographics?
it was heading towards half were from a BAME background. But I'm not sure if that does include internationals or not, or if international students is as a separate demographic.
Is that usual in a university setting?
It depends on the university. I know here, Hertfordshire and De Montfort have quite heavy black and minority ethnic populations. But then you go to University of Birmingham and it's basically white because it's a Russell Group university. But then you go to Birmingham City and very multicultural. And I know Newman, the other university in Birmingham, is also quite diverse as well. And Aston as well, which is also in Birmingham, another diverse population. But yeah, it depends on the university really. Northampton's it's right in the middle of everything. It's an hour from Birmingham and an hour from London, so you're at the crossroads.
So veering away from students and sort of young people, and to talk more broadly about your own well-being, I'm asking people for their tips of how to look after themselves.
Oh God. I think do stuff that you used to like, but don't do it anymore because people have told you that you have to grow up. You don't have to grow up. That's a lie. don't take all that. Like, do things you used to do as a kid.
That's the headline of this episode.
Yeah.
Don't grow up.
Yeah, I mean, childhood is constructed. It doesn't actually exist. So do things that you used to do when you were younger that you don't do now because someone told you that being an adult is great, essentially. And one of the things I did when I was a young child, I used to play Lego Star Wars. I loved it so much. So I bought it during the lockdown on Xbox 360 and I've been playing it since in the lockdowns and I love it. So yeah, it's just little things like that. Do things that you used to do but don't do it anymore because someone told you that you were supposed to do more grown up things. And so that's what I'd tell people.
I remember we do a street party on my street every summer. And we decided to get some games for the children. Yeah. And we got some chalk and we did, I don't even know what it's called, hopscotch.
Yeah.
And the adults were all over it. The adults were there throwing and hopping and doing all this stuff. And it was just funny to see people play because adults don't play anymore. Yeah. We're just not encouraged to, are we?
I think COVID's shown people what matters, I think. And I think a lot of people have lived not knowing who their neighbours are. Luckily where I live, we're quite good with our neighbours and we know each other's names and everything. But I know a lot of people don't. Not always because they don't like their neighbours, but just because people don't talk to each other. And I think that's another thing that's important as well, that COVID made people communicate. Because you actually have to rely on your neighbours sometimes, especially if you're living alone. People that lived alone, if you got COVID, that's basically it. You can't leave your house for 14 days.
Yeah. So
you need your neighbours basically to go shopping for you and that sort of thing.
I could talk to you forever because you're so interesting and so intelligent and insightful and really generous with your time and your expertise. So I really appreciate talking to you today. If people wanted to find out more about you, how do they do that?
We can follow social media, so at Tré Ventour Ed, which is so TreVentour, and that's across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or you can go to my website, which is tréventour.com.
Excellent. Thank you, Tré, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, you too.
Wow, I don't know about you all, but I definitely learned some stuff. Every time I speak to Tré, I learn something new. He's so knowledgeable, passionate, generous with his time and his expertise. What a joy to have that conversation. And a really important conversation to have. I think it would be really remiss of us when we're talking about well-being to only think about the positives. And actually we need to think about, heritage sites like Delapré and how they negatively impact our community and why that is, and do some stuff to actually fix it. And I'm really hoping that Delapré can take forward some of the suggestions that Tré's made about looking into its history and doing some history projects. Please go and follow Tré, check out his website, go and follow him on social media, give him all the love and support because he is an incredible human. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share it and look out for further episodes in this series.